Last week, 4 friends and I decided to explore the abandoned Willertown Hospital, a place that, according to local legends, was haunted. The idea was simple. We would spend the night there with our cameras and prove that there was nothing supernatural about the place. But what we planned was far from what actually happened. It was almost 9 p.m., and the sky was completely covered in darkness. The road we were on was surrounded by a dense forest, with trees whose bare branches looked like hands trying to grab anyone who dared to pass. The temperature had dropped drastically, and a thick fog began to form, covering everything around us. It was as if nature itself was conspiring to create the perfect setting for a horror movie. We were in my car, all of us a bit anxious but trying to disguise it with forced jokes and laughs. The truth was, no one wanted to be the first to admit they were scared. Still, the atmosphere inside the car was heavy. I was driving, my eyes fixed on the increasingly foggy road, while my friends quietly talked in the back seat. The silence was only broken by the sound of the tires crushing the gravel and the occasional nervous laugh that sounded more forced than genuine. Then I noticed something strange. One of my friends, Luke, who was sitting in the passenger seat beside me, suddenly became very quiet. When I looked at him, his face was pale, and his eyes were wide, fixed on the road ahead. Before I could ask what was wrong, he screamed, "Accelerate, accelerate now." The tone of his voice froze me. It wasn't a request. It was almost a desperate order. Something in his expression told me he had seen something he couldn't process. Without thinking much, I pressed the accelerator. The car sped up, while the fog around us seemed to close in even more. Luke kept turning to look out the rear window, as if he was expecting something to be following us. His behavior started to affect me. A chill ran down my spine, and the fear began to seep into me. Slow, but relentless. "What did you see?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. But Luke couldn't answer. He just shook his head, which only increased my anxiety. As I sped up, trying to get away from the place as fast as possible, something happened. A shadow appeared on the road, something I only managed to notice for a brief second before hearing the impact. A dry, terrible sound, followed by the sensation that the car had run over something. The silence that followed was deafening. My heart raced, and my hands trembled as I gripped the steering wheel. The others in the car were in shock, their expressions reflecting the horror I felt. Luke seemed even more terrified, muttering something inaudible. Adrenaline took over me, and without thinking, I slammed on the brakes. The car stopped so abruptly that we were all thrown forward. "What was that?" asked Anna, one of my friends, her voice trembling. No one answered. Instead, we all got out of the car, driven by a mixture of curiosity and fear. The air was freezing, and the fog still hung, making it difficult to see anything ahead. But when we approached the spot where the impact had occurred, we all wished we had never gotten out of the car. Lying on the road was what appeared to be a man. His body was twisted in an unnatural way, and a pool of blood spread around him. The tire marks on his chest and legs made it clear what had happened, but something was wrong with him. Even in the midst of the horror of that scene, it was impossible to ignore the fact that something about him didn't seem human. His eyes were wide open, but empty, as if they were meant to see. His skin had a grayish, almost translucent hue, and there was something inexplicable about his presence. It was as if he didn't belong in this world. "Oh my God, what have we done?" murmured Marcus, one of my friends. His voice was filled with guilt and fear, but before we could process what we were seeing, the fog around us began to dissipate rapidly. It was as if the air was being sucked away, leaving the environment strangely clear and clean. I knew we had to leave. I convinced everyone to return to the car, despite their initial resistance. The atmosphere in the vehicle was oppressive as we drove back home. No one spoke. The silence was almost palpable, and I was thankful for it. The last thing I wanted was to discuss what had just happened. When I dropped off each of my friends at home, I made them promise never to talk about the incident. They agreed, but the look in their eyes made it clear that it would haunt us forever. When I finally got home, the feeling of being watched never left me. The idea that something or someone was following us seemed absurd, but it was impossible to ignore. I spent the next few hours trying to clean the car, erasing all traces of the accident. I changed the tires, cleaned the bumper, and poured water on the asphalt that had been stained with blood. Then, I went straight to the shower, hoping that the hot water would wash away not just the dirt, but the guilt that consumed me. But the unease didn't go away. Even lying in bed, I felt something was wrong. The room seemed darker than usual, and the silence was so complete that it became unbearable. It took me almost 2 hours to fall asleep, but when sleep finally came, it brought with it the worst nightmare of my life. I woke up with the sensation that I wasn't alone. I opened my eyes slowly, and what I saw made my blood run cold. There, standing at the foot of my bed, was the same man we had run over, or at least something that looked like him. His body was contorted, the tire marks still visible on his chest and legs, but his eyes, or what should have been his eyes, were empty, and even then I felt that he was watching me. He started to limp toward me, making a low, guttural sound. Each step seemed to carry the weight of an eternity of pain and rage. When he got close enough, I could feel his cold breath on my face. He whispered just one word, "Ever." And then, as if he were part of the very darkness itself, he simply vanished like smoke. I attributed this occurrence to sleep and exhaustion, of course. It could very well have been a nightmare. At that point, I couldn't discern anything. But it was obvious that I was scared. Very scared. I tried to continue my routine, trying to ignore the whispers that haunted me on the following nights, the steps echoing all around me, as if he were watching me, waiting for the right moment to approach again. But the more I tried to push away the sense of dread, the more it intensified. I began to see his reflection in mirrors, to feel the pressure in my chest during the day, as if an invisible hand were squeezing my throat. More and more, the signs of his presence became unmistakable. I didn't know if I was going insane or if he was really there, like a shadow that refuses to disappear. Then one night, while I was walking down the street, I heard that same sound of limping steps, closer than ever. It was him. He was there, standing in front of me, his eyes empty with rage and suffering. There were no words this time. He said just a single word: "Forever." Then I understood what he meant. Forever. He will keep chasing me forever. He will keep going until I lose my mind completely, or until I do to myself what I did to him. Thank you for watching. Subscribe for more.